Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Vlad Andrei Porumb. I'm a reader of accounting at the University of Manchester, and I'm really grateful to the conference organizers for selecting my work that I have developed together with my good friends and co-authors, Ole Christian Hope and Dushyant Vyas from Rotman, and Simona Rusanescu from University of Groningen. Now, in this paper is of course represents a piece of work that we're all enthusiastic about. We're all coming. We all have different motivations for this. My personal motivation comes from my childhood, when I had long discussions with my father regarding nature and how corporate activity actually is sometimes harmful. So for me, it's a no-brainer that we should try to understand, to have a deep understanding of what's the effect of corporate activity on nature. So. Unfortunately, we have to deal at a global level with biodiversity loss, heavy biodiversity loss. It's a worldwide alarming problem. As we can see, we have different degrees of biodiversity loss throughout the world. Of course, in certain biodiversity hotspots, they are even more, the consequences of biodiversity loss are more dire, but it's a problem that we should all try to resolve. In terms of seeing what biodiversity loss means, it can go from orangutans, deforested homes, deforestation in the Amazon, population loss in terms of animals, elephants in this particular case, and of striking mass coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef. So these are just a few examples of what it actually means to look at biodiversity loss around us. And the starting point for our paper, for our research, is the fact that we are striving at a global level to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And prior, in my understanding, I thought that by reducing emissions, it means that we're automatically protecting biodiversity and we're impeding biodiversity loss. The thing is, greenhouse gas focused strategies often target climate metrics. So we have targets of companies to reduce their carbon intensity, to get to net zero, and so on. But assuming linear relationships between carbon reductions and biodiversity conservation is unfortunately misleading, because firms may achieve carbon targets without concurrently reducing their biodiversity footprint. So they can reduce emissions while harming biodiversity. So that's why I started to look together with my colleagues to a potential nature-climate disconnect. And in here, I'm taking the example of Nestlé. They have publicly committed to making 100% of its packaging recyclable or reusable by 2025, and to reduce the use of virgin plastics by 1/3 in the same period. Now, this snapshot from their annual report show that basically in 2024, so 1 year before they wanted to reduce their carbon, so their carbon emissions peaked in 2020, and relative to that starting point, they wanted to reduce it by 20% in 5 years. They managed in 4 years, which is a great example of a company actually attaining targets. Nonetheless, they are the subject of investigations because of their palm oil sourcing, because of their illegal water usage, and of course also in California and in Pakistan. Another example of such a disconnect is Unilever, which divested carbon-intensive brands and facilities. And while they managed to reduce their Scope 1 emissions, they continue to face biodiversity criticism, again related to supply chains, exactly like in the example of Nestlé. To such a point where to which Indonesian community came to seek justice in the UK. In here you see some, of course, not actually orangutans, but people dressed as orangutans in London, trying to raise awareness of this biodiversity issue. And last, a very telling example, Vattenfall in Germany. They sold 4 major coal-fired power plants and several coal mines. These decreased their carbon emissions by 70%, which is impressive. The problem is that while the company cut its carbon emissions by 70%, all of those factories are still running today and are continuously releasing close to the same amount of carbon dioxide. So basically, while assets, greenhouse gas intensive assets, disappeared from the balance sheet of this company, for nature, this didn't make a difference. So overall, pollution and negative impact on biodiversity continued. All of this led us to our straightforward question. How do divestitures of greenhouse gas intensive assets affect the corporate biodiversity footprint? And while asking this, we need to put to balance between potentially positive or insignificant / negative potential impacts of divestitures. For example, in the positive camp, of course, we can when companies divest GHG intensive assets, they're likely to concurrently reduce their biodiversity impact from land degradation, water pollution, air pollution, and so on. On the other hand, reducing emissions might not automatically lead to reduction in land, water, or air pollution. Then you have shared environmental stressors between greenhouse gas intensive industries and dimensions of company activity that are actually detrimental to biodiversity. Yet at the same time, you could have situations where companies boost environmental ratings through these divestitures without real ecological benefits. And lastly, the divestitures could come with integrated environmental improvements that address multiple dimensions of the company's environmental footprint. Yet at the same time, the emissions could be just shifted to the new owners. And as I said before, with the example of the German company, while assets, so-called brown assets, are not listed on the companies of one company's balance sheet, they continue to be as harmful on another company's balance sheet. To test exactly what explanation prevails, we are drawing on a rich data source from 45 countries, a vast array of listed firms, in the 2019 to 2023 period. So what we're doing is that we're focusing on GHG intensive divestitures, and we want to test if they result in an increase or decreased biodiversity footprint. And we're doing this at the level of the selling company. Initial tests show that on average, the divestitures reduce selling companies' biodiversity footprint. And we continue to express the biodiversity footprint on its 4 core pillars, which are greenhouse gas, land, water, and air. And what we further do, we split, eliminate, we not eliminate, but we split the greenhouse gas component. And because we ultimately want to see if those, if companies getting rid of brown assets, greenhouse gas intensive assets, have a positive spillover effect both on the GHG and non-GHG biodiversity footprint. So what we find is, what we document is a negative effect on both greenhouse gas and non-greenhouse gas biodiversity footprints. Ultimately, what we deeply care about is what happens in the context of divestitures at the level of the transaction. So we want to look at a subsample, of course, where we have data about both the seller and the buyer, and we want to see to what extent that the divestiture actually reduced or increased the biodiversity footprint of both seller and buyer. So now basically we're looking at the effect on net GHG and non-GHG biodiversity footprints. And what we find is very interesting. When it comes to the net greenhouse gas biodiversity footprint, the effect is insignificant, meaning that in the pre to post divestiture period, there's no reduction, there's no difference in the biodiversity footprint of the seller and the joint biodiversity footprint of the seller and buyer. But very important is that we're finding a positive spillover effect on the net non-GHG biodiversity footprint, which in our tests is explained by an increased efficiency at the level of the buying company. Lastly, we're looking at 4 relevant cross-sections to determine what are the contingencies under which the divestitures are more or less impactful. What we find is that companies with better biodiversity disclosure quality reduce their biodiversity footprint incrementally more after a divestiture. Then companies in countries with mandatory sustainability reporting also reduce incrementally more their footprints if the mandatory reporting is accompanied by strong informal enforcement. Thirdly, we're looking at divestiture type, and we find that companies with non-focusing divestitures reduce their biodiversity footprint more, meaning that whenever a company is truly concerned about its biodiversity footprint, they're going to get rid of brown assets, even if this, in essence, is not going to have a focusing effect. So they're going to, in a way, sacrifice efficiency to reduce their biodiversity footprint. And lastly, very interesting, we find that financially constrained companies incrementally increase their biodiversity footprint intensity after divestitures. And this effect is explained by the fact that financially constrained firms are more concerned with their short-term survival than attaining environmental targets. As conclusions, we document positive spillovers from GHG-intensive divestitures, and we find that these effects are contextual. We support that a greenhouse gas emission-centric framework, as we have today worldwide, is limited and insufficient for understanding firms' broad environmental impact. And lastly, our findings support that biodiversity reporting mandates should be stronger, and biodiversity integration should be done into corporate and policy strategies. Thank you very, very much, and I hope our paper is going to be interesting to all of you. Thank you very much.